Nowadays, there are many IELTS books, courses, website, teachers, all giving different information. And sometimes this information is contradictory. One website or book will tell you one thing, and a teacher somewhere else will tell you something else. In today's video, we're going to be looking at some words for academic task 1 that we've seen taught on some websites, but we think you should not use. Let's have a look. So, what are the words that we think you should avoid in academic task 1? Well, broadly speaking, these words are divided into 3 categories. Words that are too complicated, the incorrect context, or too emotional. So some words that we feel are too complicated for academic task 1 are words like vertex, nadir, zenith, acme, immutable, spire, vertex, obelisk, palpitate, immutable, oscillate, vacillate, and delineate. Now, these are words that are taught online for academic task 1, or even words that our students have used because they've been taught these words from previous teachers. Now, these are words that we think are inappropriate for task 1. There are also these words like nosedive, boom, rock bottom, go into freefall, trifling, deteriorate, slum, frantically, fall off a cliff. Again, words that make sense in certain contexts, but maybe not in academic task 1. Or if you feel that they are in the right context, then you really want to be sure. Finally, we have words that are too emotional. Words like monumental, a monumental increase, fabulous, a fabulous decrease, incredible, stunning, unfortunate, whopping, ginormous, mammoth. Let us know, do you use any of these words, or have you used any of these words in any of your practice essays or practice answers? It's a good idea to think twice about using words like this unless you're incredibly sure that they're appropriate to the graphic that you're describing. We also have some words to be careful of. Extreme verbs like skyrocket, leap, surge, soar, plummet, plunge. Now, these words are actually quite common in certain task 1 questions, but you need to be sure that these are the correct words for the graphic you're describing because they're extreme. Skyrocket implies a huge or a very, very large increase. Same with a leap or surge or soar, or plummet, for example, explains a very, very large decrease. Now, there are other ways of saying these kind of things without using these extreme verbs, but if you're going to use them, then make sure you're using them correctly. Similarly, we have these extreme adjectives, words like enormous, overwhelming, or huge. Again, these could be considered correct, but you need to be very careful about when you're using them and make sure you're using them in the correct context. Alright, just before we finish this video, we're going to look at some words that we can use in academic task 1. And we're going to do that in the form of a quiz. So here we have a line graph. It's the average rainfall in Spain, and we can see that on the y-axis we have the rainfall in inches, and on the x-axis we have months of the year. Right, I'm going to put a sentence and you need to think about what word you could put into the space. The amount of rainfall, something between January and February. Here are 2 options. Decreases or plateaus. Now, what would you put here? A or B? In this case, the answer is A. The amount of rainfall decreases between January and February. So, decreases is a good word to use in academic task 1, but there are other words that we can use. Words like falls, declines, drops, reduces. These are all very appropriate to task 1 questions, and we can use them in a lot of different graphic types. Let's continue. There is something decline in the amount of rainfall between January and February. So if we look at January and then we look at February, it's not a substantial decline, it's a slight decline. So the answer is B. Now, again, we can use the word slight or we can use other words like marginal or minimal. Again, these are appropriate words for task 1. Next, the amount of rainfall something between February and April. So let's look at February and now let's look at April. And what word would you choose in this sentence? We would say B. The amount of rainfall increases between February and April. And again, there are other words that we can use here. Words like rises or climbs. Next, there is a something increase in rainfall between February and April. So let's look at February and April, and what could we say? A moderate or a negligible increase in rainfall between February and April? The answer is moderate. The answer is A. If we say a negligible increase, we're saying a very, very, very small increase. It's almost unnoticeable. If we say a moderate increase, then we're talking about a medium increase or a modest increase. And that's some of the other words that we can use instead of moderate. Next, we have between April and May, the amount of rainfall something. So look at April and now look at May. So which word would you choose, A or B? Well, the answer here is A. It remains constant. And indeed, there are other words that we can use here. Words like plateaus, levels out, remains steady, remains the same. Let's move on. After May, the amount of rainfall, something. So look at May and then look at what happens after May. We can see that after May, the amount of rainfall begins to drop. We wouldn't really say climbs down. And instead of saying drop, we can use falls, declines, decreases, or reduces. Again, all appropriate to this kind of graphic type in task 1. There is a something decrease in rainfall between May and July. The two options, insignificant or significant. We'll look at May and then look at July. We would say that this is a significant decrease in rainfall. So significant, B is the correct answer. In academic task 1, we often use the word significant to explain a large increase or a large decrease, but we wouldn't really use the word insignificant. And instead of using the word significant, we can use substantial, marked, steep, sizable, or noticeable. Okay, 3 more. Between August and October, the amount of rainfall, we can say shoots back up or calls for backup. Which one would you choose? In this case, the answer is A, shoots back up. And instead of saying shoots back up, we could say rises, climbs, increases, or jumps up. So for example, it jumps back up, suggesting that it was high, it went lower, and then it jumps back up to the previous level or to a higher level even. Okay. In October, the amount of rain reaches the something level. Now, what would you put here? We have 2 different variations of spelling, and this is quite a common mistake for many of our students. And the correct answer is B, highest, spelled Highest. We could also say reaches the highest level, or reaches the highest point, or reaches the peak. Right. Let us know in the comments section, how did you do in the quiz, and have you used any of these words before in your answers? Best of luck with all of your studies, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye then.